They called me a failure for years, but why did my success hurt them more than my struggles ever did? The sting of being called a failure for years is a dull, constant ache, but the shock of realizing your success causes the people you love existential agony. That is a sudden, blinding pain. I'm Julian, 36. My family, my parents, Helen, 62, and Robert, 64, and my older brother, Mark, 40, were defined by a very specific, rigid version of success: corporate climbing, predictable income, and high social standing. They were the architects of their lives, always measuring, always judging. And for 2 decades, I was their constant, irritating failure. I never fit the mold. I studied art history, then bounced through a series of chaotic, passion-driven ventures: a failed vintage furniture restoration shop, a brief, disastrous attempt at artisanal coffee roasting, and long, grueling years working as a freelance digital artist, scraping by on commissions. Every family gathering was a performance of my inadequacy. Mark, the successful financial analyst who lived in the predictable suburbs, would offer crisp, condescending advice. My father, Robert, would sigh deeply, mournfully calculating the money I had wasted on my education. My mother, Helen, would offer thinly veiled pity, telling neighbors I was finding myself, which was code for unemployable. They loved me, I think, but they loved the version of me that was struggling, because that version of me cemented their own superior stability. The core lesson I absorbed from their constant criticism was devastating. My value in the family narrative was not my happiness, but my reliable contrast to their success. I was the dramatic, cautionary tale that made their boring, stable lives feel exciting and essential. I carried the weight of their disapproval like a cloak, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just the words, it was the heavy, unspoken expectation that I would perpetually orbit the edge of disaster, making them the heroes who occasionally bailed me out. Around age 30, something broke inside me. I was tired of being the failure. I didn't abandon my skills, I simply redirected the chaos. I took my digital artistry, my meticulous eye for detail, and my knowledge of aesthetics, and applied them to a nascent field: designing high-end, immersive augmented reality environments for tech companies. It was creative, complex, and, crucially, utterly incomprehensible to my family. I worked in total silence for 6 years. I cut off the emotional supply line. I stopped taking their money. I stopped attending the mandatory Sunday dinners where my failures were the appetizer. I let them assume I was still scraping by, still struggling. My company, Aether Designs, grew exponentially, fueled by a market demand I had perfectly anticipated. I hired brilliant people, signed massive contracts, and quickly became a quiet titan in the emerging tech art space. I bought a stunning, minimalist loft downtown, but kept my old, beat-up car and didn't change my humble wardrobe. I maintained the camouflage of the struggling artist. I was 36 when the charade ended. We signed a massive partnership deal with a global electronics firm. The announcement was huge. It hit every major business and tech publication simultaneously. The headline was inescapable: Aether Designs founder, Julian Vance, 36, secures $250 million valuation. The phone calls started immediately, but they were different this time. They weren't laced with pity or judgment, they were laced with fear. My brother, Mark, was the first to arrive at my door. He didn't come to congratulate me, he came to interrogate me. He didn't ask how I did it. He asked about the valuation. He wanted to know about my debt ratio and my exit strategy. He kept asking about the risk, desperate to find the flaw, the crack in the veneer of success that would reassure him I was still prone to spectacular failure. He didn't want the details of my victory, he wanted the details of my eventual collapse. When he realized the numbers were solid, his face didn't register pride, it registered genuine shock, quickly replaced by subtle, poisonous resentment. He looked around my sparse but elegant loft. "It's nice, Julian," he said, his voice forced. "But where's the family? The stability?" He was desperately searching for the predictable suburban life he had. My unconventional success threatened his definition of achievement. That was the first painful realization. My success didn't just elevate me, it redefined the ceiling they had constructed for themselves. Mark had worked 30 years to achieve solid, respectable security. I had done it in 6, working on what they called computer doodles. My triumph made his predictability look like stagnation. If your closest family member achieved exponential success based on skills they once mocked, would you feel pride, or a quiet, destructive envy that threatened your own sense of accomplishment? The bitterness was clearer with my father, Robert. He called, not to celebrate, but to critique the method. "You're leveraged, Julian. You're too exposed to the digital market," he lectured over the phone. "This isn't real money. You need a portfolio of blue-chip stocks, brick-and-mortar assets. You need a safe, conventional future." He wasn't protecting me, he was protecting his own belief system. For decades, his narrative had been that only prudence and conventional choices led to true security. My success, achieved through chaotic, unpredictable creativity, proved his entire life philosophy wrong. It invalidated the very framework he used to judge the world and, more importantly, himself. The most visceral reaction came from my mother, Helen. She finally agreed to meet me for lunch, a huge concession, as she usually orchestrated our meetings around her schedule. She was quiet through the meal, which was highly unusual for her. She finally leaned forward, her eyes wide, but they weren't focused on me. "Your father can't sleep," she whispered, her voice laced with genuine panic. "He's calculating your returns constantly. He's talking about selling the vacation condo to invest in one of your competitors, to prove he's still sharp." She confessed that my sudden success had destabilized their entire emotional economy. Their retirement, which had been comfortable and predictable, now felt like a paltry footnote next to my empire. "We were proud of Mark," she continued, "because he was always 5 steps ahead of us, but he was always on the same road. You jumped to a different planet, Julian. We don't understand it, and that makes us afraid." Then came the terrible, unvarnished truth. For years, we told ourselves we sacrificed everything for you children, she said, her voice breaking. We comforted ourselves that while you might struggle, we were the foundation. We had the stability. Your struggles made us feel important, Julian. They gave us purpose, the purpose of guiding the stray sheep. Now you don't need us. You surpassed us in a way we can't comprehend. If you don't need our guidance or our money, what is our purpose? That was the painful answer to the core question. They called me a failure for years, but my success hurt them more than my struggles ever did because my failure was the anchor for their own self-worth. My struggle justified their sacrifices, proved their system superior, and guaranteed my dependence. My success removed all those things and left them facing their own obsolescence. The profound life lesson was a tragedy wrapped in gold foil. Envy is not just wanting what someone else has, it is the terrifying loss of one's own identity when the person you defined yourself against suddenly transcends their designated role. The subsequent months were a psychological siege. My success became a mirror reflecting their deepest insecurities, and they reacted with escalating passive aggression. They started treating me like a charity case, not because I needed money, but because they needed the feeling of superiority. Mark started sending me weekly financial newsletters, highlighting all the stocks I was not investing in, framing my multi-million valuation as reckless gambling. He would preface every meeting with the fact that he was only financially liquid, not digitally exposed, desperately clinging to his stable identity. My mother tried to re-establish the dynamic of the helpless artist. She began scheduling mandatory Sunday dinners again, but the subject was always my past failures, the coffee shop, the furniture, the commissions I missed. She was attempting to rewrite the script, reminding the room of the real me, the one who almost collapsed, to reduce the towering reality of my present self. I remember a specific incident where Mark tried to belittle my work by calling it a digital fantasy. I calmly pointed out that my fantasy had just funded the purchase of his daughter's entire university education, which he had been stressing about for a year. The silence that followed was heavy with shame, but also deep, abiding rage. I realized I was caught in a trap. I could never win their genuine admiration because the condition for their affection was my conditional failure. They needed me to be less so they could feel more. If you achieved the ultimate victory over the people who consistently doubted you, would you use your wealth to elevate them, or would you use it to create an impenetrable boundary against their conditional love? I had two choices. I could engage in the power struggle, using my immense resources to crush their arguments and highlight their mediocrity, thus fulfilling their prophecy that I was still a petty, angry failure. Or, I could use my success to purchase the only thing that mattered, emotional distance. I chose the latter. I accepted the pain of their envy and their sudden, uncomfortable interest. I treated them with kindness, but I created firm, non-negotiable boundaries. I established a family trust, naming all of them as beneficiaries, but structuring it so the funds were released only for predetermined purposes: education, health care, safe retirement investments, all things they valued, but released without my personal involvement. I detached the resources from my presence. I invested in their security, but not in their conditional relationship with me. When Mark asked for a loan to invest in a risky stock, I pointed him toward the trust's investment advisor and refused to speak about specific stocks, thus refusing to play his competitive game. When my mother asked me to fund her gallery opening to secure her social standing, I declined, instead anonymously funding the scholarship of a young, struggling artist, the person I used to be. My success had taught me the final, necessary lesson: true independence is not financial, it is the emotional freedom to define your own worth, regardless of the narrative assigned to you by the people who raised you. I didn't need their validation anymore. Their disappointment in my success was simply a measure of their own smallness, not a measure of my failure. I was finally free. I still see them, but the dynamic is entirely different. They are respectful, polite, and sometimes, awkwardly solicitous. But I am no longer waiting for their approval. I am no longer defined by their narrative of failure. I am Julian, 36, a successful founder, and my quiet life is entirely my own creation. The success that hurt them so much was the only thing that finally healed me. I want to know what you think. If the people who consistently criticized you were crippled by your eventual success, would you choose emotional distance to protect your peace, or would you remain close and tolerate their envy for the sake of family unity? Let me know your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.